How does America choose its friends? Saudi Arabia has executed Shia scholar Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, a critic of the Riyadh regime, along with 46 others on vague charges of terrorism, drawing international condemnation. The monarchy, however, has rejected all criticism, accusing those critics of meddling in its internal affairs. And while claiming it is calling for peaceful dissent to be tolerated, America is standing by her old ally.
Saudi authorities knew the killings would cause global uproar. A note by the director of Saudi security services cancelled military holidays and called for maximum precaution until further notice. Yet the Saudis' Western allies continue to back them, with British Prime Minister David Cameron defending a secret deal with Riyadh. The Prime Minister even suggesting London's relationship with the country could supersede its human rights record. Saudi Arabia also executed a man alleged to have killed a cameraman working for Britain's state-run BBC. Was this a tactical move to prevent condemnation in the media?
Can the US influence Saudi Arabia? Why is America allied to so many dictatorial regimes? And does America's choice of friends affect its own reputation? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. Now, the US says it had previously warned Saudi Arabia about the consequences of executing Shia scholar Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr. Is the US incompetent or careless about stopping human rights abuses by allies such as Israel and Saudi Arabia? That's the question we put to the American public.
I will always back our government no matter what they decide to do. I do think human rights need to be guarded, and we always need to step up and do the right thing whenever possible.
I think the U.S. Takes care of its own interests and will say as much as or as little as it feels like it needs to at each time.
I won't say incompetent. I would say it's in the best efforts of the U.S. You know, that's all I can say.
Oh, I don't think the U.S. is incompetent at all, actually. I mean, I agree with what the U.S. is doing right now.
Probably so. It's very difficult to interfere in the internal affairs of another country.
What's the expert view on whether America can't defend human rights in Saudi Arabia or simply doesn't care?
I think it's quite obvious, not only US, but many Western European countries are absolutely ignoring the human rights records in Saudi Arabia because of their national interests. And what we have seen in the execution of Sheikh Nimr is that they have only condemned the death penalty in Saudi Arabia and along that in Iran. That's very interesting. They have only condemned the death penalty. They haven't actually mentioned anything about violation of human rights by convicting a non-violent protester for human rights in Saudi Arabia, Ayatollah al-Nimr. He was never a violent person. He never incited to violence. And the only sin that he had committed, according to the Saudis, was speaking out for the right of the people.
I think based on its inaction up until this point, or its action, or rather its inaction up until this point, in response to the heinous crime committed in the execution of Sheikh Nimr and the 46 other individuals that were executed on the day, I think them warning Saudi Arabia of the consequences was more informing them that this would be bad PR for them and that there would be backlash from other organizations and other entities rather than they themselves standing against this on a humanitarian basis. And if anything, it goes to show that the US are economists and capitalists before they are humanitarian. They're businessmen and our blood is cheap. As for its ties, maintaining its ties with Saudi Arabia and Israel, I think that not only do they benefit from the resources, but also they have these powerful hubs in the Middle East through which they can maintain some type of ideological control or control and policing of surrounding economies and states.
The US has long claimed that it is allied with Saudi Arabia so that it can influence change in Saudi policies. Yet the US failed to stop the execution of Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr and hundreds of others. Do the public still believe the US's excuse?
I think that diplomatically they exercised the resources that they had, but without any sort of intervention, again, you can only do so much to affect foreign policies of other nations.
I don't think I'm qualified to answer that.
Yes, people still believe that the United States is working with Saudi Arabia to try and influence policy, to try and prevent these things from happening.
I think the politicians probably do, but nobody else.
Does anyone believe? I'm sure there are people that believe, yes. Yes, I'm sure there are people that believe that.
I don't know how many folks over in the Middle East would say that. I think here the problem has been not everyone understands the issues that are being faced, and not everybody was paying attention and recognized when Saudi Arabia did execute the 47 individuals over there, including the Sheikh. I think, frankly, from my perspective, from I think the man on the street's perspective in the United States, it's something that we're concerned about because it could potentially destabilize the region, but it's not something that the average American voter is paying attention to, and that's why I hope folks like you are going to be out there trying to keep this in the press so we think about it.
What can we learn from America's apparent failure to prevent hundreds of executions in Saudi Arabia? Here's the expert view.
Well, it's ludicrous to think that the United States is having good relations with Saudi Arabia to influence its behavior. If it has any influence on the behavior of the Saudi regime, the only influence has been that it has deteriorated its behavior. It has encouraged Saudi regime to do whatever it does with more courage, without any shame. It's become shameless in execution inside Saudi Arabia by sword, chopping heads, and also has become quite outspoken about its policies outside Saudi Arabia. We see that the terrorist groups everywhere in the world, in the Middle East and in the world, from the 9/11 incident up till now, they have been either Saudi citizens or have been influenced by Saudi thought and Takfiri ideology in Saudi Arabia.
Sheikh Nimr was executed because he was rightfully expressing grievances against the monarchy, and he was demonstrating, or he was making use of his freedom of speech. If the US, who claim to be pioneers of the free world and pioneers of democracy, cannot, even after so many years, influence Saudi Arabia into not punishing freedom of speech by death, if they haven't even achieved so much, then I don't see how it is that they can claim to fulfill this aim of theirs of maintaining ties with them in order to influence policy. As for make people believing their excuses, I think the world that we live in now, because so many people have access to different eyewitness accounts or through access to different stories through various social media platforms such as Twitter, the superpowers no longer can maintain the same type of control over the narrative as they used to be able to. So, for example, movements such as the Black Lives Matter movement, which have immensely exposed the level of police brutality that's still rampant in the US to the world. We're at a point now where the superpowers can no longer control which type of information about them is disseminated as in the same way that they used to. And I think similarly with the case of Sheikh Nimr, I think that if there were not these different individuals and organizations who throughout ever since he was sentenced and in prison, if there were not these people who were speaking out online and through social media platforms, then there may have been little to no coverage of this story at all.
Over the last 20 years, the US has killed more innocent civilians than any other country in the world and is allied with some of the most dictatorial regimes. How, in the public's view, can America justify its goodwill towards these dictatorships.
I don't think, I don't know. Well, I don't think that it's fair to just blame Americans for the killings. I think that there's a lot of other countries that are involved, and yes, they probably have killed a high amount of people, but isn't it all for protection? So I don't know. It depends on how they're handling it. So
once again, there were things that were done in certain regimes that the U.S. isn't necessarily proud of, but all we can do is really look forward at this point, right? And try and stop, figure out the problems in the Middle East at the moment and try and do something to prevent further innocent civilians from being killed.
I wish they wouldn't. That's the only answer I have.
I don't think they can't reasonably justify it.
I am from Serbia, United States bombed us 1999. So I know how is that to be bombed because of we thought nothing, and we are some of them, and it's always interest. Sometimes they are your friends, sometimes not.
Can our experts clarify the way that America justifies its close relationship with so many dictatorships?
It's very obvious that United States of America and her allies in the Middle East are actually quite in line with each other in terms of their policies and their objectives. We know that United States of America created Al-Qaeda. We know that United States of America helped creating Daesh or ISIS to confront Syrian regime. And we know that in Iraq they have supported many sectarian sort of groups to fight against the government, although they are not mentioning it openly. So the objective of United States of America in the Middle East is quite in line with objectives of Saudi Arabia, which is escalating the tension there and creating an everlasting tension so that the Middle East is never capable and able to do anything against Israel, to do anything for their national interest. And I think United States is using the dictatorial regimes for its aims. It's not the case that Saudi regime is working independently and United States of America is just condoning that or just ignoring it. They are actually working on behest of the United States of America.
I think that its alliance with dictatorial regimes has been a running theme throughout the history of the United States. We have individuals such as Anastasia Somoza in Nicaragua, Saddam Hussein, who many of us, if not everybody knows, Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, who was president in the 30s through to the 50s. And these are individuals who, for example, had death squads who were shooting at protesters that were opposed to them. But as long as these countries remained reliant on the dollar and the US can have some type of access to cheap resources, and it was in their economic interest to ensure that these people remain in power, it would always put its level of humanitarianism second to its economic interest. So it's always interesting how doing things in the name of humanity have never been a priority. The priority has always been their economy and their financial interests.
Saudi Arabia and ISIL share the same ideology and execution methods. The US supports Saudi Arabia but claims to oppose ISIL. Does the US not care about it being ridiculed around the world? Here's what the public thought.
I actually think the differences are more significant than the similarities. ISIS is militantly opposed to Saudi Arabia as what it sees as a conservative and collaborationist hereditary monarchy. I think that clearly Saudi Arabia and ISIS draw on some of the same extremist and conservative trends, but I really don't think that they are very similar.
Saudi Arabia, unlike ISIS, is an actual sovereign nation. So the United States has to respect that in the sense that they're a country, whereas ISIS is not. Now, just because you disagree with what a country does doesn't mean that you necessarily can influence it.
I don't think they think much past their own pocketbooks.
nobody have a proof, but many people think that Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest financier of ISIS. So I think that they have interest, some kind of interest to finance them. And I think that United States should be more careful about it and to stop them, because someday some from ISIS will come here and do such a thing.
Why does America seem willing to accept criticism and embarrassment for supporting Saudi Arabia, despite the similarities between its ideology and execution methods and those of ISIL? Our experts said this.
I think the US is being radicalized around the world now. As days passes, everyone is realizing the way the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia on the one hand, and United States and the terrorist groups like ISIS on the other hand is going. Everyone knows, including United States of America, that the Takfiri ideology of Daesh, that thinks that everyone should be killed if they have a different idea than they have from Islam, and all non-Muslims as well should be killed, which is something quite new in Islam. This ideology comes out of Saudi Arabia. So it is very ludicrous to think that you can fight IS but support Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the root cause of all these small groups which have sprang here and there. It's their ideology which has come from, their ideology has come from Saudi Arabia, and it's quite untenable to fight against ISIS or Al-Qaeda or other groups and support Saudi regime. It is something which, just like a joke rather than anything else.
I think it's clear that it's very selective in its humanitarianism. It always seems to oppose organizations or states which are economically opposed to itself regardless of what they do. And these states such as Saudi, which do not oppose America so much, they seem to ignore their crimes against humanity. And for as long as they can control the media narrative, I think that they will continue to ally themselves with whoever is of benefit to them. But now, because that power that they have over the narrative is deteriorating, they're resorting to spying and surveillance. But I think that for as long as it can maintain its own interests, its financial interests, and its alliances with these various people, it will continue to do so, and it will continue to be selective in its humanitarianism.
Saudi Arabia's execution of Sheikh Nimr has been heavily condemned globally, yet the US is still a strong ally to Saudi Arabia. What impression does the public feel this conveys of America to the international community?
I think unfortunately what ends up happening now is you're going to see the U.S. dragged into a deeper debate, and unfortunately the result of that I can't tell you just as a man on the street. I think what I would like to see is more conversations about the issues, what raised that, why they did what they did, whether the Sheikh was actually engaged in terrorist activities, what was their evidence for doing this, the other 47 people that were executed, what's going to happen to his nephew, those types of things. I'd like to see more. I think we all need to see more information, and that would help the American voter have a better decision as to what our policy should be.
A lot of people say that the reason is because of the oil, that we need Saudi Arabia because of the oil. I think that as far as business goes, I think the U.S. needs Saudi Arabia. So I think maybe that's why the government is really trying to keep a good relationship with them. And I think it's kind of bad, but I also think that maybe we're getting something from them, and that's why we're keeping those relationships with them. So as the people, we're not in support, but the government, I think, is the oil. That's what I think.
I'm sure that there are people on both sides that see it in different ways. I'm sure there are people that condemn it. I'm sure that there are people both within the United States itself and the international community who condemn it, and I'm sure that there are other allies who still support the U.S. supporting Saudi Arabia.
Well, it shows that the United States still supports its allies in the Middle East, and that the ties between Saudi Arabia and the United States are a lot stronger than very strong and will not be broken by the execution of like a few people.
If anybody was honestly thinking, not a good one.
That the U.S. takes care of its own interests.
I believe it sort of gives them either a very unpolitical or rather very political standpoint, because they don't really know what to do about the situation or to go in, except they're probably waiting just to see how Arabia itself deals with the effects than do anything too rash or too soon.
Let's hear the expert view on the effect of US backing for Saudi Arabia on America's international reputation.
It's quite clear for international community that the United States is following a double standard value, a double standard criterion for human rights. It's very damaging for human rights reputation of the United States of America that they did not condemn the execution of Ayatollah al-Nimr. They only condemn the death penalty, and this is ridiculous. There is no connection between the two. Sheikh Nimr was not a violent person, did not incite to violence, did not incite to terrorism. And the United States, because of its alliance with Saudi Arabia and because they don't want to lose the good relations with them because of the oil and because of other political and strategical relationship that they have with them, they don't want to condemn this because, of course, it's not in their interest. And I think these sort of policies by United States would show the international community that they are following double standard. In one part of the world, the slightest penalty for the protesters is condemned heavily by United States, and in other parts of the world, like Saudi Arabia and regimes like that, there is only and always a closed eye towards these issues.
Sheikh Nimr was rightfully expressed a grievance against the monarchy, and countries such as the US, who claim to be the flag bearers of democracy, still ally themselves with Saudi Arabia, who have executed somebody for or whilst practicing his freedom of speech. And they have returned that or punished that with the death penalty, and it's hypocrisy. Hopefully, the international community would be able to realize that this facade of democracy is just that is very hypocritical, and hopefully they will be able to muster the courage to stand out against or to speak out against the United States, and for states that would mean in the face of sanctions and so on and so forth. So there are always strong consequences for speaking out against superpowers such as the United States. But at this point, we've gotten to a point in the world where there are so many crimes against humanity that are going on and being propelled, and just the rate is just accelerating, that if people do not stand up and speak out now, then everything will turn to chaos.
It has long been noted that Saudi Arabia and ISIL share the same ideology and execution methods. Yet the US supports Saudi Arabia but claims to oppose ISIL. Saudi Arabia's latest execution of a Shia scholar has created condemnation across the world, but not by America. Many believe that as long as the United States remains allies with brutal dictatorships, then Washington compromises human rights and embarrasses itself.